Since 2003, this is the Sports Source, East Tennessee's #1 sports talk show.
Presented by Pipe Wrench, and by Junk Be Gone, and by the Garza Law Firm.
With your host, John Pennington. The Sports Source starts now.
Good Sunday morning and welcome into the Junk Be Gone studios for today's episode of the Sports Source. We're going to be breaking down, I'm sorry, that was second half Sports Source guy. Second half. Yeah, he is like Tennessee. I wish I were that skinny. We're going to be breaking down yesterday's loss. Win or lose, we have fun on this show, and that's what we're going to do today. We'll talk about the 34-20 defeat, where Tennessee blew a 20-7 first half lead, outscored 27-0 in the second half. We'll talk about what went wrong. We'll also keep a little perspective on things. This team's 5-2, not 2-5. We'll look ahead to Kentucky. We'll talk takeaways. We'll talk who deserves more credit for 2022 now, Hendon Hooker or Josh Heupel. We'll talk about fourth downs. And yes, as much as I hate talking about penalties, we'll let the guys talk about penalties. All that and more in today's show, plus a poll where we get your opinion on how Tennessee's going to finish. Let's get into it. First segment of this show brought to you by our friends at the Garza Law Firm. What could be more important than finding a good attorney to represent you when you find yourself in a time of trouble? So how do you find a good attorney? How do you go about that? Well, you go by track record. And no one has a better track record right here in East Tennessee than the Garza Law Firm. Make sure your attorney is right here in East Tennessee. Not one of these groups in Birmingham, not one of these groups in Chattanooga or Nashville who pretend to be here. You see Marcos Garza in his spots, you see him all around town because he is here. So's his team. They have been for years, and they do a great job. GarzaLaw.com to learn more. All right, let's welcome in the first wave of panelists today. VFL Mike Stoll, VFL Will Overstreet, VFL Marlon Walls, VFL before he VFL'd himself and walked off, Bob Hodge, former walk-on at Tennessee. Bob, thanks for being here. All right, and let me go ahead and put up, you see what we're going to be talking about, Tennessee's loss, but let's go ahead and put up our poll question for today. What will be the Vols' regular season record? What's the final record going to be? They're 5-2 right now. 10-2, 9-3, 8-4, 7-5. And right now, the leader, 7-5. The vast majority of you, well, yeah, the plurality of you, 40%, say 7-5. They're going to go 2-3 the rest of the way. And you probably threw something at your screen right after you did that. So vote and tell us what you think their final record's going to be. And we'll talk about that throughout the show. Okay, let's get into it. Will, as I noted, they were up 20-7. As a matter of fact, the first drive of the game is about as good as they've started all year long. Yep. It was their first touchdown drive on an opening drive, first opening drive touchdown in 13 games, which is something. And then they completely butcher it in the second half. Their third quarter beginning was as bad as their first quarter beginning was good. They get outscored 27-0 to Bama in the second half. What was your biggest takeaway?
Big takeaway is how they handled our pass rush actually in that second half, where we've been so good on defense this entire year. Really, Alabama came out and put a master class on. First play of the game in the second half, RPO, they get a big run game. Next play is a deep pass. So in those two plays, they're changing up what people are seeing. They're breaking some tendencies. But two, they didn't let your pass rush team get out in the field because they're throwing deep on first down, not on second and third down. Then from there, they used hard count when they had the pass rush group in defense. They used a hard count. They got them off sides twice, 2 times in a row. They rolled the pocket out. They also used bringing in running backs and the wide receivers and the tight ends to chip and make those guys wind up blinder. They basically changed up their whole approach, and a lot of it, though, really came down to first down performance because of most of that game on that second half, you never got to third and long. You were in 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, where you really couldn't pin your ears back. But then if they thought you were going to be in that situation, they brought in where they had 6 guys on 4 most of the game, and they used a bunch of different things to change up the pace. And so it was a really effective second half momentum changing that they had done.
The adjustments
had made really did help.
All right, very good. Who wants to go next? Marlon?
I'll jump in there. That jumped right into what my first takeaway was. And it pains me to say this, but that coach on the other side is still a really, really great coach. A lot of what we saw second half wise was a lot of adjustments were made to slow down the pass rush, to take away Squirrel White in the second half. You can see it just watching the game. They did a lot of things a little bit different. And then also just being a master motivator, right? He knew that defensive line needed to be more effective. Our pocket was clean in the first half, so he challenged those guys to go get after Joe Milton. They had a couple big plays that second half that caused us a lot of negative plays on the offensive side.
Mike, I know you're going to go somewhere else, but I'll let you chip into that too. We were talking after the game. They also changed up the way they were defending Tennessee's run game.
Yeah, exactly. And so it plays into, I think Nick Saban in rematches where he's lost, he's like
21-2 at Alabama.
21-2, right? Guy doesn't lose the second time around. But more importantly, if you look at the adjustments that were made, again, I think it's their adjustments they made and maybe what we didn't anticipate from adjustments, right? So from up front, the reason we were able to kind of get some yardage early on is because we were RPO, moving the ball out. Alabama was penetrating. So when you penetrate our system, when you got 5-on-5, you've got angles that develop from depth and rushes that are on different levels. Now, when they were blocking, locking out, reading, and reacting, what that does is that shuts down those run lanes. There's no way for the gaps to occur. So that's why you saw when they're doing the RPO and everything looked to hand off inside, there was just a wall of people there because they made the adjustment, say, okay, we're not going to go after the quarterback and create different levels for the cuts. We're going to stay on one level, keep everything in front of us, and make the tackles. And that's exactly what happened.
And Tennessee's O-line is not one that's going to road grade you.
They're not.
All right, Mike, what was your big takeaway from the game, though?
So I think that really boils down to what it is the fact that they made some really good adjustments, and we didn't not so much make the adjustments, didn't even anticipate the adjustments. And that's what I've seen. You know, I mentioned a couple weeks ago where, you know, we had the Seinfeld episode where Gwen is really good looking one second, and the next time – not so pretty. I think a lot of that, as the time has rolled on, I'm starting to maybe think maybe the coaches don't really think through the adjustments. We're moving, we're making it happen. We're going to keep going with it, but you know, there becomes a chess match where you start to anticipate things to change a little bit. They're probably going to come out and do this. How do we counter that? How do we prepare to counter that? I don't think our offensive quarter maybe is in that zone yet.
I started to say we didn't say that much last year when they were 11-2. Had a different offensive coordinator.
Absolutely.
This is a guy in his first year. We'll debate that. We'll discuss that a little bit later. Bob, what was your takeaway from that game?
Mine is a little bit more big picture than just this game. I think if you look at Tennessee, one of the things that happened, Mincy gets hurt. Mincy gets hurt, your whole offensive line just goes to heck. And I think if you look at where Tennessee's right now, and if you're wanting to compete with Alabama and Georgia, which is still the class of the SEC, I think, you just don't have the depth to be able to do it because you lose one guy and your entire game changes. You go back earlier in the season, a couple of games ago, you lose Brew McCoy. Now all of a sudden you can't run some of those horizontal past the screen things because he was your best blocker on that stuff. You even look at quarterback. If you're having a hard time, you can't make a change and maybe give the team a little bit of life because you don't have anybody behind him. So right now I just look at Tennessee and where they're at, and you just don't have the depth because you lose one important guy, and it changes the whole outlook for your team.
The problem with the quarterback situation is you went out and signed a young guy who's 5-star, and that drove away the guy who should have been your backup there. Yeah, he went to Taven Jackson went to Indiana because you signed the 5-star who's not ready to play yet. I don't know that they would have made a change anyway, though. They seem to think,
and they may not. That's down on the list.
Yeah, they seem to think though that. I don't think they trust their quarterback. That's my takeaway. I don't think they trust him. Danielson said, well, you see when they're stuck at the 4, that means you have to run 3 times. Well, no, that's not an edict. That's not handed down to Moses.
Yeah.
No, they just chose not to let him throw down there. You don't see him throw across the middle a whole lot unless it's deeper down the field. I don't think they trust their quarterback, but at the same time, I think they look at it and they say, it's the best we got. Our best shot at winning games is to go with this guy.
And I think a lot of that falls on your receivers, too. Do you have anybody that can really run across the middle and get the ball?
I'll tell you what, we're going to have a whole segment on this. Let me remind you a couple things. I have seen, this reminded me of a couple meltdowns. Cover your ears. One of them was the 1991 season, the Fiesta Bowl, when Tennessee led 10-7 over Penn State at the half and then lost 42-17. That one came to mind. But the one that really fits, the 95 Florida game. Philip Fulmer fell to 1-3 against Steve Spurrier, just like Heupel just fell to 1-2 against Saban. You had a new defensive coordinator in this fella named John Chavis, who everybody wanted fired after that game. Kind of like you got a new offensive coordinator right now for Heupel. You led 30-14 at the Swamp. Big lead. And then you lost 62-37. They beat you 48-7 the rest of the way. Wow. That's what that reminded me of. So my question is, how did this happen? Was it 100% adjustments and coaching moves, or do you think there was a little bit of Tennessee taking their foot off the gas, which I think would be incredibly stupid? Do you think that played into it at all? Mike, you're grinning.
I will not make a comment since you attacked my performance in the festival. So, yeah, I think so. It was a bowl game. It's a little bit different. But,
no, but I mean, no. This game yesterday, do you think that had to do with just taking your foot off the gas at all? Or no?
I think so. You look at what
Florida.
Florida. You think what Florida did against Tennessee this season. They went out, they were ahead, and they played conservative. I think Tennessee said, "Oh, we're ahead. Let's do the same thing." And while I know they're trying to throw the ball a little bit, I think there's situations maybe if you're going to play that way or you're going to take your foot off the gas, don't put your defense, give them the short field after you just gave up a touchdown and let the momentum keep going.
I'll be talking about that later.
Yeah. See, I think it was more of, like I said, Saban being a really good coach, but then also letting his guys know, like, we're a better roster than what they have over there. We've got more depth. We should be better on the back end. We're going to make these changes. I'm going to challenge these guys, who are my 5-star, 4-stars, to go up against those guys and shut those guys down, and I think they did a great job of that.
One thing I thought was interesting is last year, if you remember, I think I put it out there. I shot Saban on the television with my phone, him mad, jumping up and down, screaming. He didn't do a lot of that yesterday. He did seem, I think there was an air of, we're not out of this yet. Whereas last year, I think he was frustrated because he was grabbing at straws, trying to figure out how to stop that offense. This year, I didn't get the feeling they were worried at all. So I think that's what you're talking about.
I think he'd been worried if he could score at will like last year.
And
right?
you could,
and,
yeah.
I think
he knew it.
If he plays a team like that again this year, he's going to be really nervous because they don't have that ability. But I think the amount, the score differential he can make that up in this game.
Bob, you're going to be in the next segment, so I'm going to cut you off. Sorry about this. Hold on. Let's go to our game gauge. These are the stats that if Heupel does them, he wins 95% of the time. He didn't do many of them yesterday. Rushing yards, you need to get to 150. They were only at 133. Had a good first half, died in the second half, as Mike discussed. Yards per rush, they got to get to 4.5. They were at only 3.5. We talked last week, what happens when another team just sells out to stop your run? Do you have an option? They didn't. Yards per play, they need to get to 6, and they win about 90% of the time. Heupel does. Nope, 5.1 yesterday. They did get 3 sacks. They got 4 sacks. Needed to get 3, they got 4. So they did get there. Let's take a look at the next graphic. This is his record now. It just went up you're now 15-18 when you allow 27 or more points. So a loss goes there. You're 15-18 when you allow more than 27. You drop to 1-10 when you don't score 30 points. Back-to-back games, he hasn't scored 30 points with his offense. 1-10 now. If they don't score 30, they're in trouble. Last week was the only time they won. You won the turnover margin yesterday, so that was a loss. So it's 30-3 overall when he wins the turnover margin as a head coach. Next one, let's just keep perspective. For as bad as that was yesterday, Tennessee's now 5-2 for just the 7th time this century. So 24 years, 24 seasons, you've only done this 7 times. If they beat Kentucky, they'll have won 6 of their first 8 games, at least 6 of their first 8 games, for just the 6th time this century. It would be the first time that they've won 6 of their first 8 games in back-to-back years in 20 years. So, yes, ugly loss. Yes, we're going to rip them apart today. At the same time, they're not 2-5. So if you're calling for people to be fired, have a sip of something, calm down. We'll have a little fun today. When we come back, who was the best player on the field? What was the worst coaching move? Come on back.